Well, today we're going to watch what we eat with Janet Helm. We welcome registered dietitian Janet Helm, who is a global food trend guru, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her data-driven crystal ball observations for 2025. What is happening in food and nutrition? What will happen in 2025? What's in, what's out, and why? How did that happen? Well, Janet's website is foodatthehelm.com. She's a soothsayer and a strategist for major food brands and commodity food groups. And she helps them set their sails to successfully provide consumers with what they want to eat, what they want to drink, to be their healthy and happiest best. Now, Janet also writes for U.S. News and World Report on hot topics in nutrition and for Today's Dietitian magazine on food trends and terrific features on the benefits of culinary travel. Welcome, Janet.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. Great to be here.
Well, let's culinary travel. Let's start with the big world of what's happening in food trends for 2025. And reading through your notes, I see that global cuisines are really, really trending. Tell me more about that.
Absolutely. And certainly they have been for a while, but now they're a little bit more mainstream. I mean, we want to travel through taste. And I think we're, much more adventurous in our food choices. And particularly Asian cuisines are trending. A Korean in particular is a big trend, and kind of street food trends for Korean. We're also seeing Middle Eastern food trend, Lebanese food. We're seeing African cuisine become a little bit more mainstream as well. And sometimes we're discovering these global cuisines through condiments, sauces. Are sometimes the gateway to some of these global cuisines if you're not familiar with them.
We've always been interested, of course, in Italian, Chinese food has always been, trend big time. But what I'm noticing in your comments there is I think it's getting more regionally specific, and then maybe different regions that I guess it kind of mirrors the way people are traveling today, more adventurous, going to different places, and then getting, the experience of the beautiful cultures and cuisines in those locations.
Absolutely. It's much more regional. I mean, that I say Asian cuisine, but it really is more specific. So it is Korean, it is Indonesian. So it's very specific to a region because there are differences. And we're discovering a lot of these cuisines through social media. I mean, the TikTok effect is real. And I think some of these global cuisines are much more accessible because of social media. An ingredient like salted egg yolk. Have you heard of that?
I did travel to Vietnam, and I remember there's a lot of egg yolky things happening there.
It is a salt-cured egg, and it's very much part of their culture in cooking with salted egg yolk. But now we find it a little bit more accessible in, say, a potato chip that's flavored with salted egg yolk, or a popcorn. So we're seeing it in snacks are also kind of a gateway to some of these global cuisines. We're first discovering them in a chip or some kind of snack that taste. Black garlic, black sesame. Those are all kind of trending flavors that are found in snacks now.
So these are maybe unusual flavors, something new, but showing up in a recognizable form, like the potato chip.
Absolutely. So familiar format, but with a, more exotic or unfamiliar flavor. And I think that's how we're discovering, and that is making a little bit more accessible. And oftentimes it is a restaurant that is maybe where we're introduced to it, some of these flavors, but now it's more in some of the, CPG and the consumer packaged goods, snacks, condiments. We're discovering it there. And not just some fancy restaurant or a small global cuisine type of restaurant, but it's through our regular grocery stores now have some of these more global flavors.
And we do take for granted the fact that we, now have, of course, soy sauce in every single store and, different kinds of things. But from a registered dietitian's point of view, because we're both dietitians and here on Watch What We Eat, we like to bring it back home to nutrition. What are some of the advantages of being more adventurous, exploratory as you travel and trying local foods and cuisines?
Well, a lot of foods around the world are plant forward. And so it's a great way to discover, really healthful foods because, meat might be, a smaller portion of your plate, where it might be vegetables that you haven't tried or pulses. Very much pulses are, beans, lentils, chickpeas, are really more of a center of the plate item. And so I think some of these global cuisines, they don't rely on a large portion of meat as the center of the plate. And so I think that is great. You're discovering maybe new vegetables that you haven't tried, exotic fruits when you travel, tasted so many different types of fruits, dragon fruit, passion fruit, and fruits that you haven't tried, but they're available here when you get home, and you might kind of add them to your weekly grocery shopping.
Now, I know you were in the Caribbean recently, and even as dietitians, we think we know a lot about food. It isn't amazing how you go place and you're like, "Wow, I didn't know about that," or like a new way to enjoy something.
Yes, yes, so much. I love Caribbean food, and I just recently wrote about it in for today's dietitian, understanding what's in that Caribbean pantry. And there might be, there's beautiful spices. So much of the spices they came from Grenada, Spice Island, or ingredients like breadfruit. And breadfruit is actually more similar to a vegetable than a fruit, and is eaten more like a potato. So there are certain ingredients, both spices and flavors, as well as fresh produce that we just are not as common here. So I do love the Caribbean cuisine and all kind of its true melting pot of different flavors from kind of the cultural influences in the Caribbean.
Okay, and we talked about plant forward. Of course, that was a big thing in 2024. How is that changing in 2025?
Well, plant-based is certainly a macro trend, and we're going to see that in 2025. But I think what we're going to see is really foods and dishes that celebrate the plant and don't try to mimic meat. And so I think we're going to see, dishes that maybe it's mushrooms, beautiful types of mushrooms that are much more widely available now. And you can have a beautiful maitake mushroom, as our portobello steak, as a center of the plate item that is just all about the vegetable and not trying to be mimic meat. So mushrooms are trending. Pulses are trending. And these items not only are nutritious and can stand in place of meat, they're also sustainable foods. And I think we are now considering personal health and planetary health. And I think those are the foods that will be big in 2025 that really provide both the personal and the planetary health.
And mentioning pulses, the beans, the peas, and all that jazz, I mean, these are sources of protein. So it brings us to another P word, protein. What is going on with it? Seems to be, and it continues to be the darling of the diet world, protein.
It really is. I mean, protein is continuing on, and it's research with consumers show it is the top attribute that they're looking for in a food. And so I think it's even bigger now with the weight loss medications and GLP-1, where they're really focused on making every calorie count. And protein is what people are looking for. A lot of new products have actually been introduced that are specific for GLP-1 users. They're high in protein, they are high in fiber, they are smaller portions. So protein is a big one. But interestingly, we talked about plant-based being a macro trend, but for every trend, there's a counter trend. And with plant-based, we have, meatless, but also guess what? Meat is trending too. Meat, because people want protein, they're looking now at high quality sources of protein or whole sources. So that's where meat is really making a comeback. And in particular, organ meats that maybe people are not familiar with, but are trending. And there's some interesting products on the market that actually blend organ meats with regular, beef. They're primal blends, or they have, different kind of names like that. But if you're not used to eating heart, liver, spleen and you mix it with a little ground beef, I think it makes it more accessible to people. But that is one of the trends for 2025 is actually organ meats.
Well, we can go back to the chicken liver pate. That's for sure. You know, Janet, this brings us to how do you, as a trend watcher, I said data driven, what are you looking at? Where do these come from? Where do these trends come from? Where do they begin? Where do they go? How does it happen?
Well, there's a lot of different sources that I use. I mean, one, I love to go to different trade shows. This is where these small niche brands are showcasing a new product and maybe trying to get distribution. But that's where some really truly innovative products are happening, and you can see when they are at some type of industry trade show. That's not something that's open to the public, but a trade show where they are showcasing their brand and trying to whether get into a Whole Foods or get into some kind of distribution. They might just be selling online at first, but trying to get more widespread distribution. So I'm going to some of the trade shows, I'm reading some of the trade magazines, or I'm relying on some market research data. And one of the, when you look at a trend cycle of where it might start, often it is in restaurants. So we're looking at menu penetration of a food or a dish or a flavor, and how often that's showing up on menus and how that grows.
So a cultural force from restaurants where chefs are excited about things, so then they get us excited about it. What are some other cultural forces that might impact? And we talked about the GLP-1 drugs. Obviously, that's a big shift where people are eating less, wanting protein. But what else is going on in our modern culture to change what we're eating?
Well,
drinking.
Yes. Well, a lot of it is on social media. I mean, that trend cycle, when you see something kind of first come in inception that's starting to show up, maybe in fine dining or maybe in some kind of global smaller restaurants that are introducing a new item. But there usually is a trend cycle. But now with social media, that trend cycle has been shortened, and we're seeing an acceleration of trends. So social media is I think, a really big impact.
Yeah. And Janet, I do not have a crystal ball, but I have a disco ball, which brings me to one of your other trends, joy in eating, cute foods. What's going on there?
Well, with today's kind of tumultuous times, I think people still are looking for an escape. And so indulgence, maybe it's healthy indulgence, where we're combining, something that's a little bit good for you, but it's still a treat. Or this idea that food can bring you joy and happiness. There is a trend, and this is global influence of kawaii, which translates in Japanese to cute. And so that's a really big trend on TikTok right now. Might be like little motifs of a bear or a flower, or it's even like the boba trend or bubble tea is kind of fits into this kawaii trend, but it all translates into cute. Or bento boxes, all of that very much a Asian influence, but they're foods that bring joy and happiness. So we still want that, even though we are, focused on health. People are looking at, food as medicine a bit and trying to eat healthier. But we also do want that little treat. So we're seeing that little treat culture continue into 2025 and finding ways to build in some moments of joy and a little bit of indulgence. And that's okay. As a dietitian, that's okay.
Right. Even Julia Child said everything in moderation, even excess. And how sweet is it to have a tiny little delicious, good quality chocolate or donut or teeny weeny little pie, as you said, cute foods, which bring so much joy to your palate. And of course, and
those many foods are trending. You look in the freezer aisle, many desserts, little single serve desserts, of whether that's a little bite of cheesecake or a little tiny ice cream bar, those are part of the trend because it's a little treat. Or maybe it's the impact of the GLP-1 drugs and people, are looking, they're eating less. But those, or solo dining is also a trend right now. But I think with GLP-1s, it's interesting. Not only is it eating less, but we're really seeing the impact of that in the food industry. People are buying fewer groceries. They're buying fewer groceries or fewer snacks, sugary foods. So the type of things that people are buying that are on those drugs, which is more and more, people are on them. It's changing how they shop and what they eat.
You know what? You're tracking trends and what is being bought, what's being sold. But what about hot topics? You write for U.S. News and you're tracking. What are the hot topics in nutrition for 2025? And maybe our listeners also can then know that and, I don't know, be a little wary of what they might see on TikTok or Instagram to know what they should be, I don't know, thinking.
Well, there's a lot of misinformation. TikTok is a good way to look at food trends, but there's certainly a lot of misinformation as well. I think one of the things that is impacting people's perception of food is ultra processed. A lot of discussion about ultra processed food. And I think what's important to keep in mind that you've got to consider the nutritional value, not just how it was processed. And there's a lot of ultra processed foods that are still good for you because, even whole grain bread is considered ultra processed, but that's a healthy food. So I think there's a lot of noise. We're just having, red dye banned. So a lot of concern about additives right now. But I think it's, if we keep focus on what you said about Joy Child, moderation, and I'm hoping that 2025, there is a return to moderation because it's not an all or nothing. We're seeing these counter trends, the meat lust, but also we're seeing organ meats or we're seeing triple burgers trend. We're seeing dairy free, a trend, a lot of dairy free, plant-based milks, plant-based cheeses, but at the same time, whole milk is making a comeback. Look at cottage cheese. Look how big cottage cheese was last year and continues to trend. Greek yogurt. So there's a lot of positive dairy trends too. So it's just this kind of I'm hoping that we're not going to these extremes, that it's not all or nothing. And I think when it comes down to it, people are buying both. They're buying plant-based milks, but they're also buying real milk. They're experimenting with some of these plant-based meat alternatives, but they're still buying real meat too. So I think we're going to hopefully move to that point that it's not all or nothing.
We're talking to Janet Helm, who's a registered dietitian, the founder of Food at the Helm, talking about food trends. And I thought it'd be fun, Janet, take a look back. Okay, in the 80s, what was trending, folks, was, pasta salad. We had a frozen yogurt, Froyo. When was the last time you saw a Froyo place? And the potato skins, remember at TGI Fridays. And then in the 70s, which is a lot of fun, carrot cake, quiche. Okay, baby, we got the quiche coming on. And then jumping ahead to the 90s, we had Lunchables, bagel bites. And then, it's so interesting to see how trends of the various decades it's nostalgic. So, Janet, as we wind towards the end of our chat here, what do you think what stayed and what starred in 2024?
Well, I think, you mentioned nostalgia. That is still big. We still crave foods from our childhood. So we'll see a little bit of nostalgia as well. So I think for, what stayed, I think are, the global cuisines. What we're seeing is third culture cuisine. So we're seeing kind of a mashup of two cultures, which might reflect someone's own heritage, that maybe they're a second, third generation from other parts of the world, but they are infusing that with American food. So we're seeing a lot of kind of these culinary mashups. And I think that will continue. A little bit more global influence to, some American staples. Or maybe a elevated touch to American staples. What's trending right now is the hot dog. The humble hot dog, but with maybe it's Wagyu beef. Maybe it is like global toppings. So there's a lot of kind of gourmet hot dog stands or street food or food trucks. So something like a hot dog is seeing new life with some elevated touches or gourmet influences.
And you were in London recently and saw some corn dogs that were being celebrated, right?
Yes, yes. A lot of global street food stands, and the corn dog being one of them. But I think it's that the ramen, we're seeing ramen continue to be big, or even something like pizza with some kind of global influences on pizza, or hot honey on pizza. Hot honey continues to be big, and we're seeing a flavor like hot honey then suddenly show up in everything. So hot honey is in snacks and desserts and other types of condiments beyond just the hot honey. So I think it's interesting where we're seeing riffs on a trending flavor show up in different ways, both savory and sweet. Like chili crisp. Chili crisp is one of the biggest condiments right now, but we're seeing that show up even in cookies right now, chili crisp cookies. And so it's how a flavor starts and riffs and kind of transforms into different foods.
It's interesting you were talking about like, hot trendy things. I was looking at the colors of the year, and food, it's all about food. The Pantone color of the year is Mocha Mousse. If you look at Glidden, they picked Purple Basil, and Benjamin Moore, if that's your favorite paint company, they have Cinnamon Slate, which apparently is sort of a heathered plum with a little bit of brown. So, we are focused on food, but especially looks like the rest of the world is too. So Janet, 2025 is, what do you think has staying power? What do you think has the staying power for 2025? And we're going to have you back so that, to continue watching these things. But can there be a course correction mid-year, depending on what happens? What do you see as you're advising, let's say, companies with their food products or just people and their diets and following trends? What do you think has the biggest staying power for 2025?
Wow. I'm big fans of pulses and mushrooms. So I think we're going to see a lot more products with both of those ingredients. I think it's going to be, well, as Whole Foods said, it's the year of the dumpling. So I think some of these global foods that could be a snack, because we're snacking more, eating, not necessarily sitting down for 3 square meals a day, but it might be smaller meals, snacks. So whether it is a dumpling or an empanada or some of these kind of global handheld foods that are encapsulated in some type of dough, those are big, and they're big in the freezer aisle, where you can find a lot of some of these global foods. So I think what has staying power are some of these global foods that people want to adventure and just discover.
Well, I am holding out for the savory Pop-Tart.
Again, it's like a handheld,
Yes,
like
no.
encapsulated
Yes, it is.
in a dough.
And actually in Jamaica, with they have the handheld, it's almost like a Pop-Tart, they're little, the patties, with the delicious savory meat inside. Well, one more thing that is curious to me, Janet, is everybody clamors to say, do you have any recipes for that? I'd love a recipe for that. Do you have a recipe for that? Now there's the no recipe.
Yes, this is the TikTok effect again. It's changing how we cook. And for Gen Z, it's probably taught them how to cook, watching TikTok. So now there are recipe books, cookbooks that really have the TikTok kind of approach, that you're assembling foods. You don't need a recipe. So even the New York Times came out with no recipe book. So it is an approach to how we put together a meal that you don't have to rely on, it's a half a cup of that, a teaspoon of this, but it's really visually, you're seeing a dish come together that's appealing, because we eat with our eyes. So we're seeing different ingredients come together, and you don't need a recipe for it, but you got it by just watching a short video.
Well, Janet, you certainly have been the recipe for inspiration and helping us all see that nutrition, of course, nutritious and delicious and exciting. You know, we can travel the world just with the foods that we eat. So thank you so much. Really look forward to having you back to see what else you're coming up with and share with us. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on Watch What You Eat with Carolyn O'Neill and wonderful guests. And you're always invited, of course, to add this podcast to your podcast menu.